Hey everyone, you're here starting with Cody and Pete, and here we are with another week's worth of troubleshooting questions and problem solving tips. So just like with all the videos, make sure if you enjoy the video, give it a thumbs up, subscribe to the channel if you aren't already, and check out the merchant shop. So let's get started. So this week we encountered some very different troubleshooting issues from our customers. The machines were acting weird this week. So some of the problems that the customers had, unfortunately, the customer nor I were able to resolve, and they actually had to go to the technician. But we didn't know that until the customer and I sat down and figured out what was going on, and it wasn't something that we were able to, like the customer and I were able to fix, and it was required of the technician to handle it from there. So we'll go over some of those issues that we encountered. So the first issue that we encountered was one that's not that common, but we've heard of it. We've had it happen before. And so what the customer's issue was is the machine was so fine. Everything was working great, except when she went to go press her thread cutter, her automatic thread cutter, and she is on a 770. So when she hit the automatic thread cutter, the needle would come part of the way down and then stop and kind of vibrate, kind of look like it was jamming in something, but the needle had never even come down to the fabric far enough. And then on the screen, she would get the two cogs, the two gears, they were locking with the X. Most of us have all seen that if we're dealing with a more modern Bernina machine. It usually means something's jammed up. So what I did is I took everything out, which I think I've shown you in other videos, but I can show you a little side clip here in a second. I took everything out, I took the bobbin case out, I took the hook out, opened up everything. And usually once you do all that, if there is a jam, you'll be able to turn the hand wheel and everything will be free. However, everything was not free. So the only thing that allowed me to turn the hand wheel is if I turn the hand wheel counterclockwise, so clockwise, so I turn it away from me. After a few turns of that, then everything would start turning again. So couldn't figure it out. So then I tried it again, hitting the thread cutter button, and it jammed again with nothing in it. So once I alleviated and the machine was able to turn, the hand was able to turn, I took off the foot and the stitch plate, and I went to clean the thread catcher, which I will also show you. So I went to go clean the thread catcher, which is the mechanism that cuts the thread, to see if it would do it or if there was thread jammed in there. So I took everything out and I went to go clean the thread catcher, and it jammed automatically. And so if you turn the hand wheel, it was very, very tight. So it was completely out of my hands. So then I went to the technician. So I asked the technician what was wrong so I could bring this information to y'all. And so what it is, there is a clutch carriage behind the arm of the machine. And so what can happen is, to be honest, I'm not even quite sure. He explained it to me, couldn't comprehend it. But there's a clutch carriage back there that can get damaged or can get bent. So the takeaway from this is if you ever get a thread jam or ever get any type of issue, like with the thread cutter jamming, don't ever force the hand wheel to go in a direction it's not wanting to go. Because he said by progressing that, or by adding more force, you can bend that clutch carriage. So typically, it's a very easy fix, and the clutch carriage doesn't necessarily have to be replaced. It's able to be readjusted and realigned. In extreme cases, it does need to be replaced. But so if you ever encounter this issue where when you hit the thread cutter button, the machine jams up, but there's nothing jamming up the machine, it just won't work. It's usually your clutch carriage, which is a fairly easy and inexpensive repair or fix, especially if the clutch carriage isn't damaged beyond repair. So we're going to take a closer look, and I'm going to show you what I did down below at a closer look in the machine to come to that conclusion that that's what it was. All right. So when the customer would hit the automatic thread cutter, the needle would come down a little bit and then jam. And then on the screen, you would have the two gears. So what we did was, okay, typically when we get the gears, there's some thread jammed behind all of this. So what we did is we took out the bobbin case, like we would normally do, release the cover here, and take out the hook. And typically, whenever you get a jam, whenever you get the gears up there, typically it means this back here can't rotate, it can't move. So we took all of this out, but the machine, like when I went over to the machine and turned the hand wheel, it wouldn't turn. Everything was still locked. It would turn clockwise, but wouldn't turn counterclockwise. So the only way to alleviate what was the so-called jam was to essentially turn the hand wheel quite a bit clockwise to get it start moving again, and everything was good. So what we also tried doing, so I hit the thread cutter again, this time with all of this out, and it did the same thing. So I had taken the foot off, and then I took off my stitch plate. Disregard, it's a little dirty. So here is our thread cutter and thread catcher mechanism. So it's a mechanism that moves the thread cutter out, grabs the thread, and cuts it very, very quickly. So what we did is I went to the settings. Well, first of all, I went and looked in here to see if there was any thread preventing the thread cutter from moving. Because at that point, I knew it had something to do with the thread cutter because the machine sewed perfectly fine otherwise. So what we did is we went up to the settings. So here we went up over to the settings, and this is on a 770, but this applies to most of the modern day machines that have this style user interface. So I went to the settings, I went to the machine, I went to the little wrench, and then where the little broom is, we click here, and there's instructions on clean the thread catcher. Yours actually may not look like this because with the upgrade that came to the 770, things have changed a little bit. They've actually made it a little bit easier. But here, we'll come here. Sometimes there'll be a little blue link at like step 2 or 3, and you would click the blue link, and then you would press the automatic thread cutter. So when we did that, it jammed up. But what's supposed to happen is when we do it, the needle's supposed to come down and stay down, just like we see here, and that metal mechanism comes out and stays out, so you're able to clean all that thread out of there. And then when you're done, you'll scroll through it and hit another link, and then hit the thread cutter button again. But as you can see with this update, upgrade, it's a little bit different. It's a little bit easier. You don't have to hit any links. You just have to press the thread cutter button, and everything moves back. But that was the final thing. Once it wouldn't allow me to do that, and I saw there was nothing, no thread trapped in there. That's when I went to the technician, and that's when he told me it was the clutch carriage that's responsible for moving this guy. That it needs to see the technician, needs to be realigned and fixed, potentially replaced. But so that was our first issue that we encountered. That was something fairly new for me. That was something that definitely required a technician. So if you do encounter all that, definitely bring it into your technician and just be reassured that it's not a costly repair. All right, so let's get on to the next question. So another common question or problem that I get, it's actually extremely common, and this has to do with on the embroidery side of our machines. And the issue that customers have is a question that comes all the time, and this week's question was not much different. So the issue is, it really only occurs with the first embroidery project of the day. So if you're going to be embroidering a number of projects, it's usually only going to be the first time after you turn on your machine that you're going to encounter this issue. So what the issue is, and I'll run through it and show you, but I'm going to talk about it first. The issue is the customer sets up their design and everything on the machine, and they put their hoop on, and they go to proceed to basically get to the next step to basically start stitching everything out, and the machine gives a message telling them to take the hoop off. So it's a message with the hoop and an arrow pointing up to take the hoop off. So many times, we see this a lot more with newer Bernina embroiderers, And so what it's telling you to take the hoop off and then to press the check mark. But what so many customers do is they take the hoop off and then reattach it right away. Well, that's not what it's asking. It's asking you to, or it's telling you to take the hoop off, and then there's a check mark on the screen. You have to check or click that check mark before you put the hoop back on the machine. And the machine will typically give you a message once you hit the check mark. The module is going to move a little bit, and then it will give you a message telling you to put the hoop back on. So you really need to wait for that message, or at least wait until the arm is finished moving. Because so many times, like right now, my embroidery arm is far away from where the needle is. So if I'm putting on a smaller hoop, or even this mini hoop, it's too far away from the needle. It's not under the needle at all. So it's not safe for the machine to move the hoop while the module is in this far position. And that's what it's prompting you to do. It's prompting you to allow the module to move closer. So to alleviate this problem altogether is, I always try and tell my customers, with the first embroidery design that you start stitching for the day, is design everything on the screen, then prompt it to move to the embroidery screen, basically the screen in which you embroider from, well before you attach your hoop. And it just prevents you from putting it on, taking it off, and putting it back on again. But if you do have it on there and it gives you the message to take it off, take it off. And there's usually always a check mark on the screen that you need to click, and then everything will start moving. Then it's time to put the hoop back on the machine. However, the customer's problem so that's a common issue, but the customer's problem that we had this week was a little different, and it actually required the technician. So I talked to this customer on the phone, and we went through all the steps. And once she put the hoop on, it told her to take it off, but there was no check mark. Or if there was a check mark, she clicked it, and when it was time to put the hoop back on, it still told her to take the hoop off. So I had her, while she was still on the phone, I had her try a different hoop. And so she tried a bigger hoop, for instance. It doesn't really matter, she just tried a different hoop. Because all of our hoops have these little teeth right here. Some of them have more, this one only has one, some of them have two, some have three, but they're in different positions. These little teeth, or little keys, tell the machine here what hoop's on the machine. So what I had her put on a different hoop, and it worked. So when she put the hoop on, it recognized that she was good to go. However, on the screen, so at that point, once you put the hoop on and it registers it, it will then display the hoop, the actual hoop that you have on. So you may have been working with a smaller hoop on the screen or a bigger hoop on the screen. And then once you put the hoop you're actually using, it would change if it was different. And so that's exactly what happened. So she put on the second hoop, the machine recognized it. However, the hoop that the machine said was on the machine was a completely different hoop than what she put on the machine. So that means the machine was recognizing a different hoop, which then means these little fingers here, I'm not sure what they're called, these little fingers here were registering a different hoop, which means they were either broken or bent down underneath. So the little sensors were sensing the wrong hoop, which is why it didn't recognize the first hoop, was because the sensors that were being pushed in, or the little sensors that were being pushed in, were the ones that weren't working. So in this particular customer's case, it was nothing she could do to get it to work. Because after we figured out what that was, she then mentioned the last time she used it, the machine didn't embroider where it was supposed to in the hoop, which then signified that the machine thought there was a completely different hoop on than what was actually on the machine. So it thought it had a bigger hoop, in actuality it had a smaller hoop, so it was embroidering in places that it shouldn't have been embroidering. So that was that customer's issue, and that is usually strictly related to the module. It's one of those extremely rare cases that we ever see a module need any type of repair. These are very robust pieces of equipment. So that's where the module, it needs to be, the sensors need to be adjusted or fixed or replaced. So that was her issue. However, I'm going to take you to a closer look and show you what most people's issues are when it comes to having the hoop on at the wrong stages. So let's take a closer look. Okay, so here we are. We've just turned on the machine, essentially. We haven't really done anything. We haven't stitched out anything yet. So let's just pull up just a design, just a mock-up, just something so we can see. So here we have our design. You may have played with the designs, you may have moved them around, you may have added something, which is fine. So what a lot of customers do is like, okay, they've got what they want, so they go and put the hoop on now, and then they go and select the little needle with the 3 dots in the right-hand corner, and then you get this message. So this message here is telling you to take that hoop off. So that we take the hoop off, and now it's telling you that it's going to start, the module and everything's going to start moving. So basically make sure there's nothing in the way that the module could hit. And then you're supposed to hit the check mark. But what I see so many customers do is they take the hoop off and then they put it back on. And then they may hit the check mark. And then it keeps telling them to take it off. And I've had customers tell me they've gone 30 minutes or so trying to figure this out. Well, unless you hit the check mark, when that hoop is off of the machine, you can go through this all day long. So what you need to do is when you get this message, take the hoop off, then hit the check mark. The module is then going to move. And you can see it's going to move in much closer. It's going to move into a safe distance. So now, sometimes, and this is where it varies with machines and situations, sometimes it will then prompt you to put the hoop back on. But it didn't tell us. But if I do go and hit the needle down here again, it's then going to tell me to put it on. But sometimes it'll tell me to put it on without me clicking on that. But now it's safe to put the hoop on the module. And then it's going to move again because now it's detected what size hoop we're using, and then it's going to move it around just to get right into the correct center and where we're going to start. So those are the steps that need to be taken when we start our first embroidery project of the day. It's as simple as that. So now, if we need to adjust things in the center of the hoop or move things around the hoop, we can go to the edit screen and we can move things. And now you'll notice the module will then move when we move our design around. But that's a very common issue that people encounter. And it's just not noticing that the machine is asking you to verify that you have taken the hoop off and that it is safe to move around. It's just a safety precaution. All right, now let's get on to the next question. Okay, so here's our next question. So our next question is from a customer from an older Bernina, but this question applies to any sewing machine. It doesn't matter what brand or what age. So the customer's issue was she was sewing, she just started sewing a project, and she was doing a straight stitch, something really simple, and the machine would sew for about 20 or 30 seconds, about 6 to 10 inches or so of stitching, and then it would break the thread, and the needle would come unthreaded and all this. And so she would rethread it, and she would sew some more. About the same amount of time, it just kept breaking the thread, and she couldn't figure out why. So here are the things that, if you encounter that issue, things to try. Some of them will make sense, but some of them you may not have never even thought of. This is things that we've seen over the years. So the first thing, when you encounter a thread breakage like that, sometimes it depends on where the thread is breaking, and how it might be breaking will give you some clues. But we're not going to really worry about that too much, because we're just going to run down the things, go over the things that can help eliminate that problem, things that you can do. So the first thing is definitely rethread your machine. That's the first thing you can do. You don't have to worry about changing anything, just rethread the machine completely. So rethread the top and the bobbin. And so yes, a top thread breaking may not have anything to do with the bobbin, but my rule of thumb is when you're having any type of issue, either it's tension or thread breaking or nesting or looping or whatever, rethread both top and bobbin. So that means take your bobbin out of your bobbin case and everything and put it back in and rethread it. So the next thing to try, so a lot of times when we encounter thread breakage, typically it has to do with the needle. It could be the age of the needle. It's just maybe an older needle, so it may have some burrs on it, which is basically little nicks or little scratches on the needle that the thread may be coming in contact with and basically shredding or popping that thread. So definitely change your needle. And a lot of things, when I'm having issues with the machine, I like to do one thing at a time. To kind of, especially if it's almost like a chronic issue, to kind of see what may be the issue. So in that case, you've already rethreaded the machine, so you can change to a new needle. Because it may not be that there's a burr on the needle or there's something wrong with that needle. It could be the wrong size of needle. That's a whole nother segment. But you want to make sure you're using the right size needle for your project, and just as important, the thread. If you're working with a thicker thread, make sure you're using a bigger needle. One of my go-to needles when working with anything other than a standard sized like 50 weight thread is a top stitch needle. I've mentioned this many times before. One of my favorite needles is a 9014 top stitch. But what's so nice about a top stitch needle is the eyelet, the hole that the needle passes through, is 2 millimeters long. So it's a much bigger hole. So it allows that thread to pass through that hole with less issues. So that's one thing you can try is you think it may be the weight of your thread, is try a top stitch needle. You don't need to go to something really big. Even if you could stick with the same size needle, but by changing it to a top stitch, you have a bigger hole for that thread to pass through. So definitely we'll go over again, rethread the machine and change your needle. Because it could be the size of the needle, or it could be the needle itself is just old and bad. Another thing to try is to make sure, if it's a Bernina, make sure it's all clean. Make sure you take out the hook and everything, and make sure there's no lint caught in there, because things like that can cause problems. And a dry machine, a machine that needs oil, can also cause all sorts of issues. So make sure if it's been a while since you've cleaned and lubricated your machine, do that. That's something that should be done on a very regular basis to begin with. Depending on your Bernina will depend on how often you need to oil the machine. If it's a machine that uses the big jumbo bobbins, so the big B9 hook bobbins, so that's like all of your 7 series, your new 5 series, and your new 4 series, they all have those big jumbo bobbins. So they recommend oiling your machine about every 2 to 3 bobbins or so. A lot of it depends on the weight of your bobbin thread too, so it depends on how much thread you have on your bobbin, will depend on how often you need to oil your machine, and the type of thread and everything, how linty it is. Again, that's a whole nother category of questions. Make sure you clean and oil your machine. So you've changed threads, you clean and oil your machine, you change your needle. Now, if you're still having issues, this could be something else. This could actually be your thread. And it could be your actual thread itself, or it could be the spool that the thread is on. So the thread doesn't last forever. We've had customers who've come in and they've got thread on wooden spools or spools that look like aluminum. Those threads are not worth sewing with on a sewing machine because they are old, very old, very brittle. So if you're working with an older thread, that definitely could be your issue. So check and see what type of thread you're working with. Some people get offended when we say that, but we don't know what they're sewing on. They could be sewing on old thread, they could be sewing on really cheap thread, and that's why it's breaking. It had nothing to do with the machine or nothing to do with anything they were doing except for the age of the thread. Another thing to check is the spool that the thread is on. So we've had brand new threads, or like spools of thread and everything, and because of the spool itself, they have like little nicks on them, or they're rough along the edges. So like they may be like rough along these edges here, and some thinner threads, they have a tendency to get caught on the slightest thing, and that's causing it to thread to get really tight, the tension, and it pops right at the needle. We've also seen thread get caught on some other mechanism on the machine, either be a thread stand or mechanisms or parts of the machine. And again, it tightens that tension really tight, and then it pops the thread right at the needle. So that's definitely something that can occur. So definitely check your spool of thread, check your thread itself, or just put on a totally different thread to see if it still does that issue. Usually all those things will fix the thread breaking. However, if you've done all of that and the machine is still breaking thread, the other thing it could be, is this is something that the technician would have to take care of. A semi-common thing is burrs on your hook. So if you have a drop-in bobbin, you're going to have a plastic hook basically, and that's where like a plastic bobbin case area. So there's not so much on the drop-in machines. There's not so much a bobbin case that the bobbin sits in. It's almost like it's the hook that the bobbin sits in directly into the machine, which is plastic. And they have a tendency to get scratched, especially if you've ever broken needles or hit something in there. A needle can scratch that hook, and that thread has to basically ride along that hook to make those stitches. So if there are any burrs or any scratches, it can cause thread breakage. It's a semi-common thing, especially on a machine that has been serviced in a while. So on our Berninas, all of our hooks are metal, so it's less likely to have that issue. But here is our hook on our 7 series. This is the case for all 7s, all new 5s and new 4s. So the thread rides along here. So sometimes we'll get little burrs along this point here that the technician, this is something that he does when he services the machine. So those burrs can get caught, or the thread can get caught on those burrs and cause thread breaking, or thread shredding are also common things. So that's something that you could check and see if you feel anything rough, but that's something that is advisable that the tech takes care of. But so that was we didn't quite figure out what solved the customer's issue, but those are all the things that we suggested to her to try and get her issue resolved. But I think that's pretty much all the questions that we had for this week. There were quite a few of them most of them that do require or did end up requiring the technician to take care of them. But some of them, at least you were able to, if you ever encounter these issues, at least you can take the steps and see if any of the things that we did before it went back to the technician were to fix your issue, because they may not all need the technician attention to be fixed. All right, so remember, if you like the video, give it a thumbs up, subscribe to the channel, check out the merchant shop. The proceeds some of the proceeds from the shop go to help support these videos and to bring more of these videos to you. All right, as always, happy sewing.